One of the things doing this has allowed me to do is to really examine and explore what happens under the sounds that you hear. Our kind of traditional way of thinking about harmony is about thinking about overtones in the overtone series. And what I have found out from doing this is that there's a whole lot of resonance generated underneath. It makes perfect sense. I even heard somebody say recently that the overtone series exists in nature and the undertone series doesn't, but what that means is that if you make a sound wave, you know, it makes halves of itself and quarters of itself and thirds of itself and stuff like that. And that is basically what generates harmony. But it also makes things that are twice as long as itself and like that too. So there's a sort of richness underneath what we really hear, you know, that colors how it sounds and that generates sort of fields of resonance. And especially like working with like things like springs and stuff like that, there's really all this just stuff going on down there that really, I don't know, it generates a whole lot of musical material. And I like that. The traditional approach to music is that there are these, you know, this is one note, but listening to it with some resonances with a sustain pedal on, I don't know if this comes out in the camera very well or not, but there's like, you know, there's other kind of things going on under there. And, you know, this was kind of what they engineered away from building traditional instruments, because those things get complicated and they sort of, fuck up the program a little bit, you know. It's when, just a temporary tangent, with recording, as the recording technology improved and it's incredibly sophisticated now compared to even what it was like 30, 40 years ago. They try to isolate that identity out of it and get this clarity. And I remember that coming up, you'd go to a recording studio, like you'd been playing for a while with your band and stuff like that, and you go into a recording studio to play, and it's a totally dead room. There's no overtones, there's no subtones, it's all, you know, bass traps in the thing, so you don't get all this stuff. So, yeah, sometimes it was incredibly hard to like play in a place like that because it didn't sound like you thought you sounded. You know, it was frustrating and disappointing. And and I always thought it was so funny that, you know, you'd hear the playback and it would just sound horrible, and then they'd like put on some reverb and, you know, stuff like that and try to make it sound like it really sounded, instead of just trying to capture the sound as it really was with all of its, I don't know, kind of the tentacles that come off of it, of any sound. In any case, doing this has allowed me to really start to understand, not so much in terms of physics and theory, but in terms of just playing and hearing and responding to what goes on in the lower part of the music. And part of the thing about that is that it's not, those sounds aren't going to come out of little tiny speakers, you know, even like really awesome Bose ones and stuff like that. Um, I think it's sad that that people don't have like giant stereos anymore. That was a big thing in the 70s. Everybody wanted like big stereos with speakers like this big, you know, with like, you know, at least 8-inch woofers in them, and you know, lots of watts, you know, and listen to music loud. That was the cool thing about rock and roll, was it got us listening to music loud, and wanting it to kind of have a physical force for us, you know, and that was you know, a product of technology, like that wasn't really available before then. Um, Having that kind of volume is what allows you to notice a lot of things in the bass. It can also help you notice a lot of things in the treble and make your ears ring and like that, you know. But sort of the interesting part of this to me has been what is underneath, and how that kind of creates a general field of resonance, and that general field of resonance, it isn't really how that overtone series way of thinking and that isolating of sounds way of thinking would lead you to believe music works. There is enormously more to harmony than is dreamt of in the universe of Euro theory, you know. It's a very heterogeneous world in there. There are, you know, and all those things that are underneath kind of allow platforms for things that happen above them. So that so you don't quite need the sonic, it's not sonic, it's the pitch loyalty that Euro music kind of assumes that you need. All kinds of things can happen above this ground of resonance that aren't harsh and aren't, you know, according to that theory, they would be incredibly dissonant and, you know, not belong, sort of. And but anything can kind of belong in the sound world if it has some support from this. And Zizek moment. So that if you think of sound as generating outward in both directions, you get this much richer field. It's not, and you don't have to try to strip sound of everything it generates, you know. You can encourage those things to happen and develop a sense of harmony that isn't what you can parse with theory as it stands, you know, Euro theory as it stands. It's much more alive than that, and it's I don't know. That's the thing I learn constantly about in this is how much more is it? How much more there is to it than this would lead you to believe. Than the standard thing would lead you to believe. And ideally, my personal prescription from that is like, I wish everyone would go out and buy big stereos and listen to music more submersively, and kind of get in it and have it loud and present and physical. Until you reach a certain amount of volume and a certain size of speakers and stuff like that, you don't really hear very much of what's underneath there. You know, it kind of takes a lot of physical force to push low notes. You know, anyone who's done that will know that, like, oh, you know, bass just eats up your power. You know, when you're like building a sound system or something like that, it takes a lot of muscle. You know, so if you listen to music quietly on your little computer speakers, like, that stuff's all just discarded. It's not there, and you won't really hear it. And you've done a really good job of trying to make it so those little speakers sound good. And for me, that's a little bit like figuring out how to make whatever garbage they put in a McDonald's hamburger taste good. You know, it's an illusion of being there, but it's not really there. You know, the richness isn't really in there. You know, and having big booming subwoofer, you know, which I like, you know, that helps quite a bit. That starts allowing some of these things to happen. I built instruments before that I thought were absolute failures, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with them until I realized that these notes are just so low that my speakers can't produce them. You know, they just kind of, they seem like they're not there, but there's really this whole thing going on in there. And, you know, where you get a sub and you go, oh, wow, this thing isn't like a piece of crap that doesn't work. This thing just is speaking, you know, kind of in a different place. So anyway, long and short of it is what do we want to be doing, and do we want to be controlling and confining the sound world to this place where it validates these sets of theorems, you know, the Euro theory of music, or do we want to find out what's going on with them? And well, it's obvious what I want to do, and I think there are lots of other people that are doing that. To embrace the complexity of it and find the resonance within that, the harmony within that, instead of trying to push it away and getting more tight control over this. You know, this is I think of that from a social perspective as a social idea. Do we want to limit and homogenize the citizens of our world, or do we want to incite them to creativity? And to me, again, that's obvious. You know, the sort of linear concept of progress that, say, capitalists and fascists and people like that have is that, yes, we all have to agree with this thing and go only in this direction, you know, and they kind of sell that as progress. But in a way, it kind of isn't, right? You know, like, are we really better off than we were 100 years ago or 200 years ago or stuff like that? Or are we more confined and pushed around and manipulated and, you know, all that? I mean, it's like, I don't think there's a line that goes in any particular direction in that. There's, you know, there's a line that goes this way and a line that goes that way and a line that goes that way, and, you know, like, from any point of it, you know, you can send it in any direction. And that's also the way I think we should think about pitch, is what sort of, you know, vector fields exist around them, you know, and kind of like, that's really fun. That's interesting way to think about sound. It's much more interesting than thinking about, like, you know, a purely linear concept of it. And to sort of allow that, the heterodoxy of sonic events to get a chance to breathe and get a chance to thrive, and, you know, or whether they fit into some simplistic notion of system, you know, I think that's something we want to do in all walks of life. And yeah, fearing the bad is kind of stupid, you know. It's anarchism 101 is like, yes, there's like mistakes that can be made, and but really, like 99 out of 100 mistakes are fine, you know. Like Thelonious Monk said, you know, there's mistakes, and then there's the kind that don't sound so good, and those happen, you know. But having the freedom to find things, like, is how you kind of unveil things and expand things, and, you know, discover things and create things. So yeah, encourage them to happen and let them happen. And yeah, some of them will suck, you know. It's like, okay, you know, move along. You know, that sucked. Like, let's not do it that way. You know, you can find out things like that, but you don't have to be always just like continually narrowing down what's acceptable. You know, it should really be the opposite. It's like, oh, that's weird. You know, like, you know, I'm playing ninths in the bass, you know, and it doesn't sound like what I thought I was going to hear, but, you know, it kind of sounds cool. And how can we make this work, you know, instead of like, oh my God, don't ever play ninths in the bass, you know. Yeah, that's sort of a big ramble, isn't it, you know. But there is a theme in here, and the idea of it is that I sort of think that our approach misses a whole lot of the point, that it does so much to isolate the sounds that we make, you know. And this is pretty much in the recording and stuff field. You find you know, a band jamming in a room, and they're making noise, man. They're like, you know, you know, they finally find like the standing wave of this room, like, man, if you hit that, it really kicks in, you know, stuff like that. But the whole approach to sort of recording and to the technology around music goes toward that isolating and away from, you know, all the mud and the sloppiness and all that stuff that's in live music. And it doesn't have to be like that, you know. You know, turn it up, get bigger speakers, like, listen to it with more of your body, you know. Don't isolate it in your brain, you know. Don't use crappy headphones, you know, like, really listen. I have a friend, and you know, listen to my stuff all the time, and like, he plays it in his car, you know, and he goes, oh, that one's pretty good, or something like that, and he'll come over to the house and it'll be on, you know, I have big old stereos around, and I listen to this stuff loud, and he goes, wow, this one, and I go, oh man, you got that one, you know, and he goes, yeah, but you know, and you just lose so much, you know. And you know, and I have a bee in my bonnet about this, because a whole lot of what I think about when I'm recording and stuff like that is all this low end stuff and these rich fields that are created and foundations for sounds that are higher, and, you know, yeah, they're more relatable to Euro theory and stuff like that. But what's going on underneath is almost more interesting to me in a way. Is um, if you dry everything out, you can make almost anything really dissonant. And this was, this is where they're coming from with the thing was to try to like dry it out as much as possible and to make it into arithmetic. And to me, I kind of want to find out like how many of those rules that they came up with, and with harmonic thought and so forth, how many of those are just completely unnecessary? And they only seem to be necessary because they haven't allowed the resonance to provide a foundation for sound. Yeah, just, boy, this is really a random one. Yeah, not quite the TED Talk style organized thing, is it? I could go on and on about this, and so it's probably better if I don't. Yeah, maybe I'll get into this again at some point and have more coherence. But in a way, the lack of, doing a nice Hegel of thesis, antithesis, synthesis procession of thinking about this, in a way, that sort of linear, dialectic style of thinking is what prevents music from getting to do what it wants to do. You play this note, and all those scalar vectors are going off in every direction. But if you want to proceed in the Hegelian manner from that, you have to choose that as a thesis, Say it isn't that. Say instead of that it's just a generative thing of a little multiverse of theses, and let them go where they may, and then follow the next ones and so forth. And pretty soon you have something that's so complicated that you can't describe it in these simple terms. That does not invalidate systems of thinking about these things. Those are all true. There's truth in equal temperament. There's truth in just intonation. There's truth in whatever system you want to have. The only reason a system is ever bad is when it's exclusionary. System's just a way of thinking about things. It's like, describing colors, you could go to primaries and say, well, they're all, related to this primary or this combo of primaries, so like, let's just only have primary colors in our life. And, that's how colors work on screens, and, through enough combinations you can get very complicated and get the combination that you want eventually. But you've proceeded along this like exclusionary, limited, elemental kind of idea as if that's true, and it's just not, because the chances are that the one thing that doesn't exist is the primary colors that are the basis of they're the basis of the way you're thinking about it. And that's kind of true of music too, is that the basis of the way we think about it, this set of pitches, yes, it works, and yes, it's okay, but they don't really exist that way. You simplify a complexity and then proceed as if that was simple. And you say, well, it just comes from there. And, you know, you can argue that out and, you know, and prove your point with it verbally, you know. However, you can just listen to it and realize, no, that isn't an identity, that sound. There's no singularity in that. There's a whole suggested world of complexity around that. And so maybe the thing we should stop doing is trying to fit the sounds we make into this system, and instead let them generate the multiplicity of systems. Yeah, I like this word heterotopia, which is that there's, you know, there's this utopian idea, and of course its best friend, the dystopian idea. But then there's also this, like, well, there's lots of topias, you know. A few of those topias might be utopias, and a few of those topias might be dystopias, but those are extremely rare, and why think about them? You know, like, when really all of the subtleties and the beauties of life end up in all these other topias, you know. And yeah, an inclusive way of thinking about music, like the systems within it are temporary, and they're like, you know, you have to make decisions, and you have to, like, have ways of knowing where you're going, and, you know, if that's what you want. You need descriptive language of things if you're, like, doing them with other people, or even trying to remember them for yourself, you know. So you can say, oh yeah, that's a fifth, you know. So that's perfectly all right. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's if you're taking, you know, you hear this, and they're saying, shit, that fifth isn't pure enough, man. There's all this, listen to all that stuff in there. Like, we've got to get that stuff out, because, like, this is supposed to be a fifth. And yeah, I think that's where we get off the track, and where we make music not nearly as interesting as it should be to us. Like, music's a cool thing, right? You know, people that make it have a lot of fun with this, and, you know, find lifetimes of investigations to undertake with it, and all kinds of ways of doing things. And you know, let's not squeeze the life out of it, and try to make it conform to, you know, some idea that's so pathetically simple that, you know, it's almost beneath our dignity to really, and I don't think that we do even, you know, to confine it that way. I don't know, really all over the place on this one. I think I should just give it up.